Hello viewers, you're welcome back to class. Still on bearing, I have some examples. And the first one is the bearing from A to B is 231 degrees. Calculate the bearing from B to A. So I'll start by sketching how it should be before the calculation. So I'll draw the four cardinal points: the north, south, west, east. The bearing from A to B is 231 degrees. So if this is point A, and the journey starts from north clockwise 231, because this is 90, that's 180, so 233 degrees will be falling in here. And as you can see, I don't have much space here, so I'll rather take this to a place like this to be more convenient for me. So that's why I'm gonna remove it now. I'm be here, a better space, north, south, west, east. The bearing of A, the bearing from A to B. This is point A, and I'm going to move clockwise 90, 180 to this side. It's really not exact, but the 231 degrees will be falling into the third quadrant. So 231 degrees here, that is the bearing from A to point B. This is point B. I have the four cardinal point again: north, south, west, east. So the bearing from A to B is 231 degrees. So we are asked to calculate the bearing from B to A. In other words, the bearing from B to A will be this angle. This is the bearing from B to A, or we can call it the bearing of A from B. Now, we can do it in two ways. We can use the opposite bearing or the co-interior angle C. So before we go into that, I want us to see this. Angle at a point is 360 degrees, and we already add this 231 degrees, which implies that the remaining angle here, will be 231 from 360. So 360 degrees minus 231 will be left with 129 degrees. So the angle here is 129 degrees, and it is the co-interior angle C. So this co-interior angle add up with whatever is here to be 180. Now we don't know the angle here, but since we have 129 degrees here, and these two angles add up to be 180 degrees, We're going to subtract 129 degrees from 180 degrees and we'll be left with 51 degrees. And for bearing, it's going to be 051 degrees, to be written in 3 figures. So 051 degrees is the bearing of A from B, or the bearing from B to A. And this time around, it's been solved using the co-interior angle C method. For the other one, which is the opposite bearing, for the opposite bearing, the initial bearing we were given is 231 degrees for the bearing from A to B. So for this case, since it's more than 180 degrees, since the bearing given initially is more than 180 degrees, and we are asked to find the opposite bearing, and this is more than 180 degrees, we're going to subtract 180 degrees from 231, and the remainder will be 51 degrees. So the solution now is the bearing from B to A is 51 degrees. And I've done it in the 2 ways. I've done it using the co-interior angle C, and I've done it by the method of the opposite bearing. So I move to the next example. Okay, viewers, we move to the second example. The bearing from C to D is 41 degrees. Calculate the bearing of C from D, which we can also call the bearing from D to C. So I draw the 4 cardinal points: north, south, west, east, and the bearing given is the bearing, this is point C. The bearing from C to D is 41 degrees. I'm going to move from north in a clockwise direction. So moving from north in a clockwise direction gives my 41 degrees here. That is the bearing from C to D. This is point D. This is point D. North, south, west, east. So what we are asked to calculate is the bearing from the bearing of C from D. The bearing of C from D. So from D now we move from north in a clockwise direction to meet C. So it's either we call it the bearing of C from D, or the bearing from D to C. And these two, we can do it. If we are to do it by the opposite bearing, since what we were first given is 41 degrees, it's not up to 180 degrees. So to find the bearing of C from D, the bearing of C from D, it will be 41 degrees plus 180 degrees, which is 221 degrees. I told us that in using opposite bearing, if what was given initially is not up to 180 degrees, we're going to add 180 degrees to it in order to get the opposite bearing. So to get the bearing of C from D now. We add 180 degrees from plus 41 degrees, and we have 221 degrees. Using the co-interior angle C, we already knew that these two angles, they add up to be 180 degrees. These add up to this angle and this angle, they add up to be 180 degrees. And since this is 41 degrees, what will be left from here will be 139 degrees, because 41 from 180 degrees will result to 139 degrees for the co-interior angle C. So when we have this, and the full turn of this angle, the full turn is 360 degrees. So to get the remaining angle is to subtract 139 from 360 degrees, which will give us 221 degrees. So we still arrive at the same answer. Either we use the opposite bearing or we use the co-interior angle C method, whichever, we still arrive at the same answer. So viewers, the bearing of C from D, which we can also call the bearing of D, which we can also call the bearing from D to C. The bearing of C from D can also be called the bearing from D. This is point D to C is 221 degrees. We move to the third example. Okay, we move to the third example, viewers. We are asked to calculate the bearing from F to E. The bearing from E to F is 8 degrees. So I draw the 4 cardinal point, north, south, west, east. The bearing from E to F. This is point E. The bearing of E to F is 8 degrees. We have to write in 3 digits. This is point F. So the bearing of E to F is 8 degrees. So going by opposite bearing, when what we got is less than 180 degrees, what we do in order to get the opposite bearing will be to add 8 degrees, this 8 degrees plus 180 degrees, and the result is 188 degrees for the opposite bearing, which implies that for the bearing from F to E, the bearing from F to E, which is the opposite of the bearing from E to F, will be 188 degrees by opposite bearing. That one is very fast, short, and simple. When the first one, the first bearing, the previous one, is less than 180, what you do to get the opposite bearing is to add 180 to the previous one, and that's all. But using the co-interior angle method now, this is the full turn of this angle is 360 degrees. So, and the angle here and this angle here, they add up to be 180 degrees. So if we have 8 degrees here, to get the remaining angle here, it will be to take away 8 from 180 degrees, which results into 172 degrees. So the co-interior angle C is 172 degrees. For us to get the bearing from F to E, assuming we've not gotten the answer by the opposite bearing method. With the co-interior angle C method, it means we're going to subtract 172 degrees from 360 degrees. Since the full turn of this angle here is 360 and we add 172 here, we now subtract 300, it will be 360 degree minus 172 degrees, which give 188 degrees. So in both ways, we arrive at the same answer. But the fastest one here is the opposite bearing. It's very fast. The bearing from E to F is 8 degrees. Calculate the bearing from F to E. So if what you got initially is less than 180 degrees, add 180 degrees to get the opposite bearing. If it's more than 180 degree, subtract 180 degree from it, the remainder is your opposite bearing. That's just it. So now the bearing from F to E is equal to 188 degrees. And we can also say or call it the bearing of E from F. The bearing of E from point F. Thank you, viewers. Continue to watch, like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Bye.